Welcome to the IWP Podcast, coming to you live from the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. I'm Jim Robbins, Dean of Academics at IWP, an accredited graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs, offering a variety of certificates, master's degrees, and doctorates, both in person and online. You can check out our programs and our courses at our website, iwp.edu. The war in Gaza has two fronts for the White House. One is the ongoing ceasefire negotiations in the Middle East. And the second one is the political threat that Joe Biden is facing from progressives at home. Israeli War Cabinet Minister and Netanyahu opponent Benny Gantz reportedly was lambasted by Biden administration officials during a White House visit earlier this week. Vice President Kamala Harris and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan took Gantz to task for humanitarian conditions in Gaza and the stalled progress towards a ceasefire. Recent public statements reflect the Biden team's growing frustration. Harris's call Sunday for an immediate ceasefire is a case in point. Since sensitive negotiations are underway, this type of rhetorical intervention is disruptive and counterproductive. And this was the toned-down version of a speech that reportedly was much harsher on Israel before cooler heads in the National Security Council intervened. But Harris's speech was part of the continuing theater happening in Washington, aimed not really at helping end the conflict in Gaza, but placating the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. On Super Tuesday, we saw a protest vote in Minnesota in which uncommitted garnered 18% of the Democratic vote. The previous week saw a vote in Dearborn, Michigan, in which Joe Biden actually lost to uncommitted. This underscored the restiveness of pro-Palestinian Democrats. If they choose to stay home in November, it could mean Donald Trump winning some closely contested states. So the White House has resorted to high-profile stunts to show its commitment to the suffering Gazans. Case in point, the airdropped humanitarian assistance, which even the Washington Post and Politico noted is the most expensive and least efficient means of delivering aid. Now there is talk of mounting a seaborne aid delivery onto Gaza beaches, which might make for interesting television, but would be extremely complicated, risky, and expensive. As one DoD official said, "It's not like the movies." The White House had been pressing for a ceasefire before Ramadan begins on March 10th, hoping to milk some symbolism from the Muslim holy month. However, Ramadan is not a season of peace for violent extremists. Indeed, some terror groups glorify the idea of suicide attacks during Ramadan to speed the attackers to paradise. So there's no particular pressure from the Hamas side to get in the spirit of the season. In practical terms, tying the ceasefire to an artificial deadline puts the United States at a disadvantage. If the parties don't meet the preferred timeline, it makes the administration look weak. The White House says the Israelis are cooperating and put the onus on Hamas to come around. But from the terrorist point of view, they could blow past the deadline just to show that they can defy the Americans. After all, Hamas is not Biden's friend. Urgent demands for a ceasefire aside, the facts on the ground determine the course of the negotiations. Israel is slowly, carefully, and systematically tightening its grip on Hamas, block by block and tunnel by tunnel. Hamas strongholds in southern Gaza are gradually being reduced. The pace is slow because Israel is seeking to limit casualties, both of Israeli troops and Gaza civilians, and importantly, not to accidentally kill the Israeli hostages that Hamas is holding. But while progress is slow, it is steady, and Hamas is running out of places to hide. Hamas knows that the Israeli hostages are the most important of their many human shields. If they had not kidnapped so many Israelis, the IDF could be more determined in rooting the terrorists out of their tunnels. But Hamas cannot hold the hostages forever. The hostages have been a sticking point in the ceasefire negotiations. Hamas is seeking 10 Palestinian prisoners to be released for each Israeli. But Israel wants to know who Hamas is holding and, critically, how many hostages are still alive. The Hamas leaders claim they either don't know or won't say, which does not augur well for the families of hostages hoping for their safe return. If it turns out that many or most of the hostages have died in Hamas custody, there will be little hope for a ceasefire. Hamas is also smarting from the fact that the United Nations has finally substantiated charges that Hamas terrorists engage in widespread sexual assault during the October 7th massacre. Better late than never from the UN. Perhaps the UN is trying to deflect criticism after more evidence emerged that UN relief agents working for UNRWA were directly involved in the October 7th massacre, and perhaps even the aforementioned sexual assaults. Another issue is Hamas demands that Palestinians be relocated to the liberated zones of northern Gaza, which is really a way of Hamas seeking to reconstitute political control over these areas. This has been a non-starter for that very reason. Regardless of the pace of the ceasefire talks, the Hamas leadership has to know that they will not survive in the long run, and they could end all the suffering in Gaza immediately, simply by surrendering. Perhaps Israel might show them some mercy. Perhaps. Meanwhile, Israel needs the time and space to achieve their war objectives. The United States is not helping with its symbolic interventions into the diplomatic process, not to mention the two-state solution notion we talked about last time. Granted, President Biden is being pushed politically to placate progressives in an election year. But like Hamas, the progressives won't be pacified and will not compromise. Biden's symbolic gestures communicate weakness to them and leave the progressives demanding more. Their aims are the same as Hamas. They want political power and to see Israel destroyed. And like the Israelis in Gaza, they are slowly encircling their foe in the White House, block by block. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this podcast, please share and subscribe. For IWP, I'm Jim Robbins. Join us next week for another edition of the IWP Podcast.